Welcome to part 3 of the nervous tissue. In the last lecture, I talked about the epineurum and the endoneurium. On epineurum, I said the endoneurium, which is the Schwann cell that surround the axons, and we have the dense irregular, which surround a bundle of axons, and I said a whole bundles, all of them, all the nerve structures surrounded by another connective tissue, which is the epineurum. Endoneurium Schwann cell, perineurium dense irregular connective tissue, and the epineurum is another dense irregular connective tissue. The space that we can see here, which filled with the cerebrospinal fluid, this is the perineural space. Last time I told you that the gray matter is a collection neuronal cell body, and the white matter is the collection of the neuronal processes, which is the dendrites and the axon. Today we're going to discuss the ganglia. Ganglia is the collection of the neuronal cell body in the peripheral nervous system. As I said, neuronal cell body usually found in the area of the central nervous system. Whenever they found outside the central nervous system or in the peripheral nervous system, we call them ganglia. Ganglia considered as an organ because they have a defined limit. We will see they are most of the time surrounded by a capsule. They have different tissue elements. They have glial elements. We have supportive cells. They have several types of different tissues. They have epithelium, they have connective, they have muscles. We have two types of the ganglia. We have the craniospinal, which is found in the dorsal root of the spinal cord, and usually these ganglia are sensory, or we could have it like embedded or near the organs, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, which are motor function they have. So the sensory usually contain somata of the pseudo-unipolar neuron. They have the neuronal cell bodies. They're found in the dorsal root of the spinal cord. Also, they're found in the cranial nerve. And from there, the name craniospinal came. When we say sensory, also we say craniospinal ganglia. The motor ganglia involved in the autonomic function, the function of the small intestine, the sweaty glands, the organs or tissue that we don't have a control over it. And usually they are under the control of the autonomic nervous system. And part of that, we have the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, which is fight or flight function. So the ganglia is a void structure encapsulated by dense connective tissue. These ganglia contain neuronal cell body, as I said, outside the central nervous system or in the peripheral nervous system. And usually, you can see here, they have defined limit. They have capsule, which is dense irregular connective tissue. And all of these structures are neuronal cell body. And we can see around them, they're mostly surrounded by supportive cells. As I said, the craniospinal and the dorsal root ganglia usually contain the pseudo-unipolar neurons. They're found in the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, also in the cranial nerve. And usually the input for these ganglia is come from the sensory transducers, from the sensory organ. And usually these ganglia relay this information toward the spinal cord, which is part from the central nervous system. Usually the neuronal cell body are large, centrally located nucleus, and supported by at least 3 to 6 glial cells. And these cells, because they surround the neuronal cell body, they call it satellite cells. So this is the organs, for example, the skin, and we can see here, this is a spinal cord, the dorsal horn, the ventral horn. Usually the dorsal horn is the sensory, whereas the ventral is the motor. And here we have the dorsal root and the ventral root. And we can see this is the area of the sensory ganglia or the craniospinal ganglia. And we can see it's relay the information from the organ toward the nervous central nervous system, specifically to the spinal cord. As I said, they have large cells, centrally located nucleus. They are surrounded by supportive cell, glial cell. The name of this cell is the satellite cells. They are analogous to the astrocyte and usually found in both type ganglia, the motor ganglia and the sensory ganglia. The second type we have from the ganglia, we have the motor ganglia, and usually these ganglia located in various places and usually input from the motor neuron in the central nervous system, not from the sensory. Neuron ganglia relay signal to the target organ. So usually they have an order for the organ, for example, for the smooth muscle or the sweaty gland to contract or release their secretion. Mostly of these ganglia, the motor ganglia, involved in the autonomic system function, which include peristalsis and the sweating. Peristalsis is the movement and the contraction of the smooth muscle inside the hollow organs. Usually the locations varies, could be found in the sympathetic trunk near the spine, could be near the organ, collateral ganglia, or could be embedded inside the organs. This is the ganglia, the motor ganglia, and here we need to see that the nucleus are found in the periphery and surrounded between 2 to 3 cells of the satellite cells, whereas in the sensory ganglia, the nucleus is found in the center and usually surrounded by 3 to 6 cells. So here the sensory, see the nucleus in the center, whereas here the nucleus is found in the periphery, and as I said, here surrounded by 4 to 6 cells of the satellite cells, where here it's surrounded by 1 or 2 cells. For the autonomic nervous system, we know the autonomic nervous system, we have two portions. We have the sympathetic and we have the parasympathetic. And usually in the autonomic nervous system, instead of one neuron, and that neuron send their axon toward the organs, for example, for the muscles, voluntary muscles, there is only one axon reach for contraction. In the autonomic nervous system, we have two neurons. One of them, the first cell body, for example, start from the spinal cord, then will synapse with the second neuron, which could be near the spine or could be embedded inside the organ or near the organ. So this one here is called the preganglionic nerve, and usually the cell body found in the central nervous system. Whereas the second one, which is the postganglionic nerve, their neuronal cell body is found in the ganglia. As I said, instead of one neuron, there is two neurons. The first neuron is found in the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, whereas in the autonomic nervous system, we have two neurons. The first neuron, the neuronal cell body, is found in the central nervous system, whereas the second neuron cell body is found in the ganglia. So we start with the first one, which is the sympathetic nervous system. Nuclei of this system located in the thoracic and lumbar segment. Okay, see this one here. This is the first one. Okay, and we can see here they have short preganglionic nerve, and this one going to synapse with the second neuron, which their cell body is found in this ganglia. And we can see from here they have a very long postganglionic nerves. So these are the main differences. The first preganglionic fiber start in the thoracic and lumbar region. From there, they send their first preganglionic nerve, and synapse with the second neuron, and usually the neuron is found in the sympathetic trunk, and from there we have the second nerve that's going to supply the different structure, which could be smooth muscle or it could be sweat gland. This is the slide from the roof of the thoracic cavity, and this structure here, which is found lateral to the vertebral bodies in the thoracic region, this one is the sympathetic trunk, which is this one here. And from this one here, we have the second neuron that's going to supply the different organs. The second part of the autonomic nervous system, which is the parasympathetic, again consists of two nerves. We have the preganglionic nerve here. One start from this region here, and the second one here, and then we have the postganglionic nerve. This is the neuronal cell body of the second neuron, and this is the postganglionic nerve. As we can see here, usually the preganglionic fibers or nerve is very long compared with the postsynaptic ganglionic nerve. The first neuron have very long fiber compared with the second neuron, they have very short nerves. Usually the neuronal cell body of the first neuron is found in the area of the oculomotor, facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. All of these nerves are part from a cranial nerve. And the last portion, or the second portion, is coming from the area of the sacral region to supply the structure that found in the pelvic region. So we can see here we have the first preganglionic nerve. Then at the area here we have the ganglia, we have the second neuronal cell body, and from this neuronal cell body we have the second fiber. As I said, very important, the preganglionic is very long compared with the postganglionic nerve, which is very short. As I said, the preganglionic, the first neuronal cell body, is found in the area of the cranial nerve, number 3, which is the oculomotor, the facial, number 7, glossopharyngeal, number 9, and vagus, number 10, and also from the sacral region. Now we'll talk about the spinal cord. This is the butterfly shape gray matter. This area here, we have the neuronal cell body. We have very large neuron. This is the area of the dorsal horn, and this is the ventral horn. Usually the dorsal have sensory function, whereas the motor have motor function, the ventral portion. And the area outside here, this is the area of the white matter. And usually at the area of the white matter, mostly we have the neuronal processes, which include the axons and dendrites. As I said, the dorsal and the ventral, dorsal sensory, ventral motors. In the area of the thoracic and first lumbar region, we have another horn which is found at this area here. We call it the lateral horn, and this lateral horn play a role in the formation of the autonomic nervous system. So this is the gray matter, white matter. We have the central canal here, a commissure here, and we have the central canal, and this surrounded by the ependymal cells. As I said before, with the blood vessels, they form the choroid plexus, which is responsible for production of the cerebrospinal fluid. Now we'll talk about the cerebellum. Cerebellum, again, we have a gray matter, white matter, but the difference from the spinal cord that the gray matter is found outside, whereas the white matter is found inside. The gray matter consists of 3 layers. 1, 2, and 3. Number one, which is the molecular layer, mostly neuronal fibers, whereas this is the area of very large neuron, which is one cell layer. This is called the Purkinje layer because it has a large integrator neurons, and usually these neurons are multipolar. And the area inside we have small integrator neuron, and because their appearance almost look like the lymphocyte, we call it the granular cell layer. This neuron, which is the Purkinje neuron, they are multipolar, very large neuron, and as I said, they are integrator and they form one single cell layer, which is the Purkinje layer. The last thing I want to talk about, which is the choroid plexus. Choroid plexus is consists of these cells with the blood vessels, blood capillaries. And as we know, these cells, which is the ependymal cells, with the blood vessels form structure. We call it the choroid plexus, which is responsible for protection of the cerebrospinal fluid. Usually, the cerebrospinal fluid, they have the same component of the blood because it's just a transudate from the blood. And usually these cerebrospinal fluid surround the brain from outside and the spinal cord, also filling the space, for example, the central canal that found in the spinal cord and the ventricle that found in the brain.